It's 2023, and we are currently in a decade that spurred a collection of great remakes. Look at Resident Evil, for example. With the success of the second and fourth remake, it's no surprise that more series are following suit. The remakes successfully reimagined and expanded upon complex lore and characters, making them suitable entries and follow-ups on beloved games. Also recently, Dead Space joined the ranks of good remakes. It effectively reworks some of the game by fleshing out the floor plan and adding side missions. These beloved series were given new lives with the creation of a full remake, which surpassed previous technological limits and boundaries that their originals faced. It's potentially exciting to hear that our past favorites are getting a new breath of fresh air. All in all, it's easy to argue that making a good remake is certainly possible if enough work, love, and resources go into it. It's also potentially terrifying because it could go terribly wrong, like really wrong, like could tarnish the collective memory or piss off the fans of the original by being that bad. Kind of like how Resident Evil 3 crashed and burned, although that only made the original more appreciated in that case. Unlike other remakes that were successful in the series, RE3 Remake didn't add anything to the table, actively worked against itself. It's truly an example of how a remake doesn't always measure up, and what a series has to lose if they gamble on it. But we're not talking about that today. Today, viewers, we're talking about Layers of Fear and Silent Hill 2. Both games are getting remakes, according to recent announcements. Both games are being rebooted by the Bloober team. Bloober is most known for the original Layers of Fear, but also other horror games like Blair Witch and Observer. This made me stop and think about both series, alone and then against each other. These games have very different footprints in the gaming world, but both of them are being remade in roughly the same time frame by the same team. That's worth thinking about. It's especially worth thinking about as we're close to June, when the remake of Layers of Fear will be published for PS5, Xbox, and PC. The success of the remake of Layers of Fear may predict the ultimate outcome of the remake of Silent Hill 2. That's a lot of pressure. Personally, I liked both, although I favorably lean towards Silent Hill 2 for obvious reasons that I'll discuss later. Both could be described as psychological thrillers with an unwinding story centered around the main character's wife, but it's easy to say one does this more successfully than the other. One reason I decided to do this video and relate these two games to each other is the origins of Layers of Fear. It's not a secret that PT greatly inspired Layers of Fear to a point where it seems a tad too similar if you really think about it. Not to say that taking inspiration is a bad thing, but there's an obvious line. If anybody has forgotten, PT, or Playable Teaser, was a demo created by Kojima Productions, originally for an upcoming installment of Silent Hill that was later cancelled. Despite its lost potential, it's beloved amongst Silent Hill fans and inspired a myriad of games that attempted to recreate its gameplay and chilling environment. It was, unlike previous Silent Hill entries, in first person and featured an endlessly changing hallway with hidden gems and an unknown protagonist that battles against the ghostly Lisa. I'm not throwing stones here, but the timing and design of both games say a lot about where Layers of Fear was coming from and where it was going. Some would argue, like YouTuber Bob Bids, that Layers of Fear is a PT clone. Which is kind of fair, I can't exactly disagree. Both were first person, shared spooky lady antagonists, and featured mysterious space phenomenon, or impossible spaces to be specific, but that's to unpack in another video. So, what do Silent Hill 2 and Layers of Fear have in common? What did Silent Hill 2 do that Layers of Fear didn't? What are the strengths and weaknesses of both? And lastly, what could a remake add to these series? Do they even need one? Can Bloober be successful, or are they doomed to fail? This video does contain spoilers, as I try to dive deep into each game, so if you haven't played either game, be forewarned that I do describe their plots in depth. Before I get into the major parts of the video, I'd like to revisit each game's plot just to make sure we're all on the same page. Some people who have played Silent Hill 2 may have not played Layers of Fear, and vice versa. First, I'll explain Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 was created by Konami's famous Team Silent, and a big departure from its predecessor. It centers on James Sutherland's story as he is pulled into Silent Hill after receiving a strange letter from his deceased wife telling him to meet her there. Like Layers of Fear, and basically everything ever, it was also inspired by other media. A great source of inspiration for Silent Hill 2 was Crime and Punishment, but don't let that fool you. Silent Hill 2 made its own identity clear and out from under any shadows. James, during his ambitious journey, meets teenage runaway Angela, gluttonous angry Eddie, and the annoying child Laura. They all appear to be on their own journeys in Silent Hill, but stand to be temporary obstacles for James to deal with. Most importantly, James runs into Maria, a doppelganger of his dead wife, who appears to be the dead opposite of Mary in looks and personality. The voice acting is odd, admittedly, but each character is pretty rich and enthralling. It's easy to be pulled into the story. What's with Angela? Why the fuck is Eddie like this? Where's Maria? She was just behind me. God, I really hate escort missions. Much of the gameplay involves monsters that reflect metaphorical themes related to James as a character, such as sexual frustration or guilt. James periodically sees the others during his time in Silent Hill. Angela and Eddie appear to be battling their own inner demons during their parallel journeys to James. On the other hand, Laura seems largely unaffected by the town, likely due to her innocent psyche. Maria pops in and out too, being the mysterious siren that attempts to distract James. At several points of the game, James is faced with Pyramid Head. You'll likely recognize Pyramid Head even if you haven't played Silent Hill 2 before, as he's quite transcendent at this point. It's revealed towards the end of the game that James smothered his dying wife and was the ultimate cause of her death. It's shown that Pyramid Head was a creation and manifestation of his own guilt. The game has multiple endings, depending on a couple different mechanics in the game. I won't describe all of them today, but the best one in my opinion was the Leave ending. The Leave ending finds James leaving the town with Laura after finding resolution with his guilt and Mary's death. I don't know if that's controversial, but I'm a sucker for a sorta happy ending. The game is highly rated according to sites like IGN, Game Informer, and Metacritic, and for good reason. James's journey was thought-provoking and emotional. The soundtrack is addictive, and the graphics were top-notch for the era. Overall, it aged spectacularly. Enough couldn't be said about this game. It was truly a marvel, and even today, there's an active community around Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill as a series in general. It's a beloved entry into an even more beloved series. Layers of Fear, on the other hand, was created by the Bloober team and was a first-person psychological horror adventure game, according to Wikipedia, although adventure may be too strong of a word. And again, there are clear indications that this game was inspired by PT when examining the sound design and look of the environment. It features a large Victorian house that the character and player explores, revealing the past and present of the painter who is haunted by his past deeds and his dead wife. The goal of the game is to complete the painter's magnus opus through completing puzzles across the entire house. The game is separated into 6 chapters. The setting takes place in the 1920s in the United States and begins after the painter returns home after a court hearing. The game slowly reveals several truths about the painter. He suffers from hallucinations, is a heavy drinker, obsessed with his own art, walks with a limp due to a prosthetic, and is relatively alone after pushing away his friends and family. There are cliches here, but I'll give the game a break. It looks really pretty. His wife is painted, no pun intended, to be the painter's antagonist and victim. One example of their tumultuous relationship happens after his wife attempted to burn his paintings and the painter reacted in violence. After a horrible fire permanently disfigures his wife, the painter attempts to care for her and his daughter, but continues his alcoholism and painting obsession until his wife commits, die. Presently, it is revealed that the painter has used his wife's dead body to conduct his art. Her skin became a canvas, her blood, paint, her hair a toothbrush, etc., etc. The plot of the game is a little lacking, in my opinion. It feels a bit too surface level to be really compelling. A bad guy who did bad things is haunted by his past. That's it. YouTuber Gaming Harry, in his review of Layers of Fear, also points out the connection between Dorian Gray and the protagonist, which is a commentary on beauty and corruption. But the comparison is a little too on the nose without real merit. Layers of Fear doesn't really offer a societal commentary like The Portrait of Dorian Gray did, and maybe that's part of the problem. Like Silent Hill 2, there are multiple endings. The loop ending finds the painter finishing his current painting, a portrait of his wife. It then mutates into a mutilated version, and the painter is forced to trash it alongside several other portraits of the same kind. The selfish ending is where the painter finishes a portrait of himself, which is then put on display amongst other works in a museum. In the family ending, his completed portrait includes both wife and daughter, which causes the painter to realize his hideous mistakes and sets himself and all his work ablaze. The game is also more jump scare centric compared to Silent Hill 2's Avenue of Tension. Layers of Fear, unlike Silent Hill 2, received relatively average reviews from Metacritic, Game Informer, and IGN, although some did love the game for its horror and artistic elements. Layers of Fear is a game that is either a hit or miss. Either you loved it or it was incredibly meh. Personally, I enjoy Layers of Fear. It certainly wasn't my favorite, but its atmosphere and soundtrack created an enticing and strangely calming at times environment. I can't blame people for seeing it differently. After all, it felt like a walking simulator at times rather than a psychological puzzle game. The two games sought to tell a story about a complex, or not so complex, main character that wasn't necessarily a reliable narrator. We see through their perspective, one a monster and the other one more of an anti-hero. I think Layers of Fear attempted to remake some of the magic that Silent Hill 2 successfully managed, but fell a bit short. But why did it fail? And will a remake really remedy it? There's a couple of particular similarities regarding the plot and characters between these two psychological thrillers. Stay with me now. For one, there's an emphasis on interpersonal relationships between the character and those surrounding them in the game. Although, I will admit that Layers of Fear does lack some key features that Silent Hill 2 succeeds in. For one, the audience gets to know key characters in Silent Hill 2 much better than Layers of Fear. The world and lore of Silent Hill 2 is fleshed out by Mary, Angela, Eddie, Maria, and Laura, although not all equally. They all add something to the game and demonstrate the character of James by how he reacts and behaves around them. There are a full cast of characters, each one having their own voice and role. Layers of Fear mostly relies on the house to tell a story, but the two other characters besides the protagonist play, sort of, large roles too. The painter is constantly met with reminders of his failures relating to his wife and child. They stand to represent what the main character lacks, but this means his family stands to be more object than human. The painter is defined by his relationship to his family and his art, but these relationships aren't fully explored nor defined. These interpersonal relationships are deemed important, but Layers of Fear doesn't lean into it the way Silent Hill 2 does. Silent Hill 2 utilizes these relationships as tools to tell a story without having to force it down your throats, but this isn't the most glaring parallel between the two games. The biggest similarity between Layers of Fear and Silent Hill 2 is the narrative's focus on the tumultuous relationship between the main character and their wife. While it's arguable that both games also focus on other parts of the main character too, such as Layers of Fear centering on the painter's obsessive tendencies with his own art and alcohol, and Silent Hill 2 following the journey of James's guilt and horror of the town and mystery of Mary's letter, the major plot twist relies on the inclusion of the wife. But I want to make clear that these two relationships look largely different from each other, even though they share one thing. From James Sutherland's battle against Mary's illness to the painter's abusive treatment of his terribly injured wife, there's a theme they both revolve around: resentment, although the resentment manifests differently for James and the painter. James's resentment lies on the matter of his sick wife and being a caretaker of somebody slowly declining in their health. His resentment was implied to be a slow build due to the stress and anxiety of his partner's failing health. James was selfish in an incredible way that cost his wife's life, there's no denying that, but we can't deny James's humanity. The painter, on the other hand, sees his wife as an obstacle between him and his art and physical beauty. The painter's failure as a father and husband is very interlinked with his resentment too. It was not a slow build, but a wildfire that always existed in him, and only made worse with the scarring of his wife due to the fire. We, as the audience, see how persistent the painter was, trying to get her the best care available, but all because she had lost her beauty. He cannot fix her, and so she is no longer worthy of being an object of inspiration. The wife's objectification is clear. The painter, in one of the endings, says he's sorry, But did we, as the player, see a change in the main character? I just don't buy the apology. This seems to be a failure in the game. We see a glimpse into the painter's life, not this necessary journey one takes to receive forgiveness or absolution. Layers of Fear certainly doesn't have to do that, though. It isn't just that sort of game, and it's unfair to judge it solely by that. While both men ultimately rejected their place as the caretaker in the wake of their wives' illnesses, only one attempted to truly gain forgiveness. They both failed, but it's interesting how both games take wildly different paths and thematic journeys. Now, it's easy to argue and see that these two games have more differences than similarities. The list could be endless, but I'll only focus on a few of them today. One big difference between Silent Hill 2 and Layers of Fear is the ultimate relationship between the main character and the player. The painter and James Sutherland are very different characters who cope with the death of their wives in incredibly different ways. We never really get to know the painter, or his wife. We never even get a first name for any of the characters in Layers of Fear. This puts a wall between the player and the unnamed artist. This is especially strange because we play the entire game in first person, which should allow for the player to step into their shoes and promote a certain kind of empathy only born out of quote-unquote seeing through somebody's eyes. We're meant to see the world as the painter, but it only gives us room to interpret with half-baked information. Even the walls of the house are covered with art that isn't by the painter. These details matter. We don't truly know the main character because we're never given the chance to outside of a tell-don't-show storyline. We don't know much about the painter past simple factual truths that were relayed by the game in a relatively straightforward way. We know he has a limp, likely due to having served in World War I and has trouble sleeping. But what do we know about his intentions? His motivations past an obsession with his own art, or the way he truly felt about his family? Do we even know how he feels about his own art? Maybe I'm being too harsh and these answers are in the game. Maybe the game intended for the painter to be vague on purpose. I just don't know. This is relatively different compared to how we get to know and understand James. While both games reveal information about each character throughout the game through scenes and documents, there's something inherently missing from Layers of Fear. The painter lacks a voice that James possesses. We feel something for James, whether good or bad, while the painter only inspires mild interest and ultimately contempt. We, as the audience, figure out pretty quickly that the painter is just a bad person. He's selfish, abusive, absurd, angry, and a bad husband. The painter suffers from haunting hallucinations from his past. The painter is, regrettably, one-dimensional at worst and missing something to be a compelling character at best. The player does get a plethora of information due to the various interactive items around the house that tell rather than show, but it all feels a tad bit flat, especially compared to the robust character study that is Silent Hill 2. I do realize that my interpretation of the painter is not flattering, nor it is the only possible one. Plenty of other people have read into the game as the protagonist exhibiting guilt. I just feel that, personally, I wasn't convinced of it. I don't see this as a moral journey for the painter, but one that follows his descent into madness. But again, I'd recommend playing the game and seeing for yourself. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Layers of Fear is more about the imaginative and haunting atmosphere and environment that the game created. The focus isn't necessarily the painter, but what's around him. Not every character has to be morally gray to be compelling, but I guess I want something more from the painter. Another difference worth mentioning is the vast difference between how Mary and the painter's wife react to them. While it is arguable that Mary is a figment of James's memory of her, her place and behavior towards James comes from a place of hurt during her last weeks and months before passing. Mary was afraid of dying, and like many would, lashed out at the people she loved because of it. Mary did not resent James at the time of her death, but the circumstances around it. This is very much unlike how the painter's wife is shown. The wife is characterized by her frustration and resentment of her husband's failings, behavior, and growth of mental illness that only exacerbates the tension between the two. The painter's wife lashes out, but does so in a way that attempts to cut the painter to the core by commenting negatively on his art. The wife's fear is external rather than Mary's internal feelings. The wife here isn't a possibility of salvation, but a haunting spirit. The wife is the antagonist, which is a far cry from the way Silent Hill 2 reveals James to be his own antagonist in a way at the end of the game. It should be noted that both are regarded as tragic figures that incite sympathy from the player. Mary and the painter's wives are victims of circumstances and unfairness of life. I do think that Layers of Fear did provide a tiny more grounding and context to the wife figure compared to Silent Hill 2, which focused so heavily on James's perspective on Mary. One thing I do wish is that we know more about Mary from her own perspective, even if that was through text-based documents. I'd love to see more done with Mary, or even Maria, but we'll see. So how does this relate to the remakes, and what does this mean? While I do think it's a bit strange that they're rebooting a game from 2016, I think Layers of Fear would benefit from a reimagining of the main character, the painter, and the story in general. It needs a stronger identity that's not reminiscent of other games. There's so much potential with how the story is presented and told that expanding it could only strengthen the lore and plot. I'd like to see Bloober give more identity to Layers of Fear. Let it tell a story worth telling instead of relying on gimmicks. I'd like to see a main character that's more relatable, surprising, complex in a way that most humans are, even if they're scummy. I don't know, but something needs to happen here. Bloober has the potential to really make this work, but I have my reservations. I'm not entirely certain where the remake is going or what it is focusing on. Plus, Bloober team doesn't have the best track record. People seem pretty mixed about them. They're okay, but are they able to pull off a masterpiece with more time and resources? I have even more reservations about the remake of Silent Hill 2. I'm not convinced we even need a remake considering how advanced the graphics, plotline, and characters were in the original. This is especially true with the addition of Silent Hill 2 Enhanced Edition. Silent Hill 2 Enhanced Edition, to quote the site, is a project that makes the PC version of Silent Hill 2 compatible with modern hardware and displays while enhancing the experiences through updated visuals, audio, and features. It works incredibly well, it's quite beautiful, and the team that made it should feel super proud. Maybe all we need is just a re-release of the original to make it more accessible to modern players. This restoration and enhancement of the original is more than enough to make the game come alive again. I'm just not sure a remake will really add anything. In fact, it has more chance to fail than succeed. Bloober team seems adept at building an environment that's compelling, so I can only hope they continue to do so for Silent Hill 2. What do you think? I'm curious as to how other people see these two games now that their remakes are in the works and coming soon. I'm Phenomena, and I like niche video games and internet things. Thanks so much for watching. I'm still learning scripting, video editing, and such. I really had trouble with audio this time around, so sorry about that. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Phenomenal. Thanks!